In a sense, right? I mean, working life can make you more conscientious,
and it can also,
and having to raise a family and so forth over time.
and you have to learn to let things go, both with family and with work and stuff like that.
And getting along with your family, your in-laws, your kids, your in-laws that you get through your kids and so forth, as well as all the different people that you are forced to deal with at work, all the faculty meetings that you sit. Makes you more agreeable as time goes on.
I guess what I'm saying is
You
I
just
just
give up.
don't see it. I don't see it as a passive thing. I see it more, I guess what you're saying, is a function of living life.
Although on the larger scale, it's an interesting aspect of literature that I'm not entirely sure what to look at. I mean, in some of these studies, particularly the Morochik stuff and some of their papers, they try to look at sort of big things like retirement and widowhood and so forth, and they don't find huge consistent impacts, which, it's kind of puzzling, but there it is. Yeah.
Could it not be a conscious change that you can be conditioned to change? You don't actually think I should change, but after having negative impacts with what you already are doing, you don't consciously change, but something conditioned you.
Well, I think probably both. I mean, I think there are a lot of indications in psychology that a lot of times our behavior gets changed by circumstances or by other people, with or without our awareness, and then our attitudes and values change. And the other thing also happens, I mean, you can make a conscious, intentional effort to change, and probably even to change at this level. But Constant McRae, anyway, would say most people don't. There are also the people that managed to argue for 20 years that there wasn't being changed personality. So, you might want to take the grain, as my wife would say, with a couple of cups of salt. Somebody had a hand in the cover.
So what's the differences between temperament and personality? Because temperament is some kind of born with.
Oh, you think there is a difference?
I just see it as referred to children. They say temperament, and then once you hit 14, then suddenly it's no longer temperament and changes person.
Oh, that could be. Yeah. It's an old in adult work. It's an older phrase, and some of the earliest stuff in the Baltimore longitudinal studies was done with the Guilford Zimmerman temperament surveys. We used to actually call adult personality disorders called temperament surveys. So I was thinking, in the adult literature, I don't know that people have used the temperament word a lot, and I think when they do, it sort of means the same thing. In emotion, which we'll talk about in more depth next week, there's this potential distinction between emotion and mood, and then trait, personality, emotional states that kind of go upwards in terms of how stable you expect it to be. So emotion could change. Some theorists would say should change minute to minute, and certainly hour to hour. And mood you would expect to be stable over the course of a day, probably over days, maybe over weeks. And traits should be stable over months, years, and decades.
And I also have a question about how biologists or neuropsychologists discuss about personality. Because for dementia, their personality might change.
Probably a different kind of question. I'll say a little bit, but let's come back to the dementia question more when we do the dementia lecture. Because I'll say right now, is one of the huge problems you you run into about the personality change and dementia thing is that once people get demented, you can't get them to take personality surveys. And so you end up relying on other family members' perceptions of them and perceptions of whether they've changed. And personally, and I don't know that everybody needs to worry about this, I think that there are a lot of changes in people with dementia that you can trace back pretty directly to the memory loss and the intellectual change that people are inclined to see as other things, including personality change and delusions and so forth. And I think people may be reading too much into what's mostly cognitive change. And particularly when you move to ratings by other people in the family, one of the very direct problems I see with dementia is that to the extent, and it's a pretty big extent that you get, not just the disinhibition that we've already talked about with normal aging, but huge disinhibition when you have dementia that gets into the frontal lobes pretty quickly, which Alzheimer's does tend to do. That another way, I think, of looking at what goes on is that people close to the person may see aspects of that person's behavior and personality that they've never seen before. Like it may be that your husband had a really foul mouth all these decades at work, and he kept a lid on it at home. And then he gets dementia, and he starts cussing a blue streak, and you genuinely think it's a personality change because he hasn't seen it before. Or you see a different level of aggressiveness or hostility that may begin. And I mean, I've known people for these things were literally true. I mean, maybe like in his youth he was a bar fighter, and or at work he was in a job where aggressiveness, hostility was part of the ecology of the workplace. But again, he goes home and he's nice until he gets dementia, and then there's no control, and you've got no censorship anymore, keeping a lid on this stuff. And I just think that's different, and I think clinically anyway, I think it can take you in some different directions in understanding and working with people who are doing those things. It probably doesn't matter to the families. There's some interesting stuff on behavior genetics, so biology in that sense, particularly around the two longest and best established things, neuroticism and extroversion. There seem to be some fairly high rates of heritability for it. I think maybe some for the others, although I think there's been less, and it's been less consistent. I just haven't paid tons of attention. People tend to say things like, on the neurobiology side, because the frontal lobes are where executive functioning is, they think that that's where personality is. It doesn't seem like it goes a whole lot further than that level of thinking, for the most part. There is a whole neurobiology of emotion, which certainly it could be tied into things like neuroticism, certainly to the emotions that make up neuroticism. It may be that some people are more chronically activated and where negative emotion tends to be processed in the brain, and other people are more chronically activated positive emotion. People who are really into neurobiology would think that the structure is determining personality. Some other people might think that the personality determines the structure. The fact that you have that personality means that you're chronically activated, and changing your personality would change the activation. I don't think we have anything like the kind of research that we need to have to know what the answers to those kind of things are. There's certainly been one of the sort of theories of what neuroticism might mean in the brain. It is more conceptual than factual, as there are